Everybody, my name is William Leschallas and I'm the Programme Manager for the degree in Rural Land Management at the Royal Agricultural University. I joined 2 years ago, having spent nearly 30 or just over 30 years in practice. So that's a brief introduction to me, but welcome everybody. And firstly, I'd like to thank Tim Hopkin at the Land App and Matthew Morris from the Duchy of Cornwall for the excellent webinars they've laid on for us all over the last 3 months. They've done an amazing job to bring together so many people with different skills, most of whom, not surprisingly, work within the rural sector. I'd also like to offer a warm welcome to our panelists and to thank them for sparing the time to join the discussion. They are David Brooks, Nick Millard, Jenny Phelps, Ian Hodge, and Richard Pilkington. I'll let them introduce themselves shortly. Sadly, I've not been able to attend all the webinars, but I know they have been well attended, to say the least, and have got an extensive discussion going. Each week, Tim has asked attendees to answer questions on a wide range of topics, with one word to describe their feelings, needs, or requirements. The recurring themes for the headline top answers have been around education, knowledge, and communication. I'm therefore thrilled to have the opportunity to chair this roundtable discussion around the role of education for enhancing the future of land ownership and management. Education is at the forefront of everyone's minds, and never has it been more important for our sector. We need to encourage more people to join our industry and strive for excellence. We live in challenging times with a lot of change to incorporate into our rural businesses in the short to medium term, with long-term consequences. Of course, education is always a hot topic in the news, and all the academics around the UK at this time of year are spending long hours marking exams and coursework. In the main, at undergraduate level, universities bridge the gap between school and the workplace. It is our job to transform school children into free-thinking individuals who can and are willing to think laterally, be articulate in their subject area, and be willing to challenge the norm in a diplomatic and sensibly argued manner. They need to be businesslike, professional, good communicators, collaborative, and work ethically. For courses such as ours, which offer the accreditation to the RICS and our strong links with the CAAV, they provide that vehicle to turn a schoolboy or girl into a chartered surveyor. It is all about employability. With an excellent and forward-thinking education, then finding a job and doing well should flow from it. However, education is not just about the undergraduate. It must also take into account the postgraduate students, CPD needs for those in practice, and also the encouragement for schools to put a career in the rural sector much higher up their list of priorities when advising their pupils. In addition, there is the need for the pupils themselves to have a much improved understanding of the rural environment, the career opportunities that exist, and how their food gets from field to plate. If one looks specifically at the rural or rurally based real estate chartered surveyor, their role has changed dramatically over the last 20 to 30 years. We live in a fast-moving world which is becoming ever more complex. The requirement for specialists and experts in a particular field of work has grown exponentially. Landed estates have complex and diverse businesses with large turnovers. They now recruit people with good business acumen to be their chief executives, which is a move away from the tradition of the land agent doing all the work. I hasten to add that there are, of course, many chartered surveyors who are excellent business people, but an equally good living can be found by specializing in a particular skill. An example of this is the rising need to have specialists in utilities work and compulsory purchase. it seems to be forgotten sometimes that the practice within which you work is a business, and that needs managing properly as well. I feel I must now refer to the pandemic and Brexit. The former has made everyone look at their business in a different light, examining it in a way that perhaps they've never done before. What things within the practices and the landowners' businesses will have changed forever when things finally get back to some form of normality. The environment and food has risen even further up the priority lists for politicians and the general public. The statistics around pollution levels, wildlife, flora and fauna during the pandemic will make an interesting read and will need a period of time for reflection. We have elms, natural capital, public goods, biodiversity, net gain, and many other considerations to build into our business models. I remember when I was at college, milk quotas had just been introduced a few years earlier, and people made a lot of money out of becoming experts in that field of work. It took the industry by storm. Of course, milk quotas were eventually phased out, which I do not see happening with the new schemes being introduced because of the subject areas they cover. They will, of course, be amended or replaced to reflect changing needs and improvement. However, the underlying principles will be there for the long term. This will continue to bring challenges to us all when we try to balance the need for a growing population to be fed, the need for more housing probably taking land out of production, but at the same time making it sustainable and environmentally friendly so that future generations can enjoy the countryside and wildlife that our forebears gave us as their legacy from the way they managed the land. Before I hand over to my illustrious panel, I close with the thought that our landscape and management of it has changed over millennia, and not much of it can be called 100% natural. After all, we laud Capability Brown for the landscapes he created. Our job as educators is to make sure that we do now and over the next 50 years, what we do now and over the next 50 years does not destroy large parts of it together with the businesses that rely on it. We have a large and complex job to do covering all generations and parts of society. As educators, we must strive to ensure that our students achieve excellence in their studies and performance in the workplace. I'll now hand over to the panel to introduce themselves, starting with David, and many thanks. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, William, and good morning, everyone. I'm David Brooks. I'm the current president of the Central Association of Agriculture Valuers, the CAAV. And for those of you that don't know either what the CAAV is or indeed what agricultural valuers do, the CAAV is the professional body that I would say is the main body to provide us with the information we need to do our job. And without that information, which is knowledge and comes from education, we couldn't advise clients in the way that we do and give them the ability to maximise the value out of their land and their assets. William just mentioned specialism and becoming specialists. That's a trend which is becoming more and more popular these days, but I would maintain that the breadth of knowledge that you need, even as a specialist, is exactly the same as it ever was. Because if you don't have that breadth of knowledge, which you need to have to pass your CAAV exams, I would say, without the breadth of knowledge, even if you specialise in certain thing, you won't be able to pick up other work for your firm. So you may be specialising in one particular thing, be it telecoms or be it solar panels or be it development options. But if you can't see the opportunity that lies elsewhere on that client's property, you won't be bringing in work for your client or improvements for your client or work for your firm. So it's important that even if you're a specialist, you still have that broad breadth of knowledge and able to do the best for the client, which is what it's all about. And the CAAV's motto, do what is right, come what may, is absolutely vitally important in all aspects of what we do in the rural world. Now, we're looking at education today, education in land management and how important is it? It's vital, because without education, you can't advise clients what they should be doing. You need to be educated. You need to know more than the client does. Otherwise, they won't use you. And to know more, you need education, which comes down to going to a good university, RAU, or anywhere else indeed. But also it comes down to, from school, getting the right people with enthusiasm, because it isn't just education, it's having that enthusiasm to learn and want to help the client that actually makes you a good or mediocre agricultural valuer, chartered surveyor, or land agent. It's important to get people into the profession, my profession, or general rural work in any type of or form, from non-agricultural backgrounds. The number of people coming out of farming and doing other things these days means that there's actually fewer people there. We need to replace that. There's a black hole that needs filling. And we need to encourage people from non-agricultural backgrounds with enthusiasm, with keenness and interest to come in. And that's important. I think that's vitally important. And then the importance of professional qualifications. Is it RSCS? Is it CAAV? Is it Institute of Arbitrators? There's a whole raft of different qualifications that you can obtain. It's important that you do. It shows that you've met a standard and shows you are meeting and continuing to meet and uphold those standards, which is vital. Clients must trust you, otherwise they don't give you work. Clients must trust your knowledge, so you need the education. It's vital that you have the education and clients can trust and value what you do. If they don't trust and value what you do, you won't get paid and you won't earn a living. And I think on that, I'll go back to William and he can then pass you on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Nick, I think it's now you, if he's online.
Thank you, William. You were muted briefly. Good morning, everybody. I'm in darkest Somerset, where we don't have the Formula One broadband speeds of other parts of the country, so I'm afraid it's either sound or vision, so I've gone for sound. Firstly, I'd like to echo everything that David said, particularly in the context of the need for a broad general knowledge and the ability to deal with all sorts of problems that you might face. As usual, I'm conflicted, which is a state I normally find myself in. I started life at a livestock market and spent most of my professional career in private practice with a foot in the education camp as well. When I was in private practice as an employer, then most of my thoughts about education were, why can't the universities teach them how to do the job? Now I'm an academic most of the time at the RAU and at Henley. I'm wondering why employers are so narrow-minded in what they want universities to do and why they don't want people with a more academic upbringing and background. And that's perhaps an extreme way of putting the conflict which does arise, most notably, I think, at master's level, which William referred to. How do we produce rounded individuals capable of learning very quickly how to do the job in technical terms, and you can't learn that in full until you're out in practice, but also with a broad breadth of knowledge that helps them to engage with both their clients and with other parts of society. I think one of the challenges we all have in the rural economy is the extent to which society has become polarized between rural and urban. Sometimes that's overly exaggerated, but elsewhere I have the experience of working with a group of school children from inner city deprived areas who we take into the countryside, and it's very new to them what they find. I spoke to somebody on a course last year who heard a cock crow for the first time, and that was quite extraordinary to him and quite extraordinary to me. And as educators, I think one of our roles in order to encourage more people into the profession is to make sure that there's a real appreciation in urban society of the rural environment and also in rural society of the urban environment. So we all complain about the fact, or we all worry perhaps about the fact that people don't understand farming anymore, but not too many of us from the rural environment have bothered to go to a high-rise block in Wolverhampton to see what that's like. So one of my real interests in education is the extent to which we can bring an awareness across society of the role that each of us play. So I'm looking forward to the debate, and particularly if somebody can explain to us precisely how many case studies we should do and precisely how much academic work, then I'm sure you'd agree, William, that would be a great help for us in planning programs. Thank you.
Nick, thank you very much. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Your last statement was spot on. So Jenny, if I can move on to you next, please, and welcome.
Oh yes, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me to join the panel. My name's Jenny Phelps. I'm a Senior Farm Conservation Advisor for the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. I'm also an alumnus from the RAU, and I also teach two third-year undergraduate modules there, which is Applied Farmland Ecology and the Farming and Integrated Environmental Local Delivery module. And what's really lovely about teaching those modules is that because we're involved in so many different projects and farmer-led initiatives for DEFRA and for other government bodies, that we can bring to the classroom really the latest thinking around innovations around payments for ecosystem services or public goods or the new environmental land management scheme. And I think just to sort of build on what was just said is that, you know, my passion for teaching really is very much about trying to help inspire and enable people to find what is their niche within our society and what they can really offer towards helping them feel that they've got a sense of purpose and they're inspired and can build on the strengths that they have and the interests that they have. So it's a real privilege really to be involved with that every person that I meet, and that's not just the students that I teach, but also young people, maybe it's farmers out on the farm. It's very much about how can we help each other to become resilient and act on climate change and all the other challenges that we face. And I suppose because we're involved in so many projects that we're exploring all the new innovations around agroecology, we're exploring all the innovations around how we might enable land to be managed in a way that delivers healthy, sustainable food for a safer and more resilient and fairer society, as just was being said. And the key thing for me within education is we do all have a role to play, but some people find it really hard to find that role for themselves. And quite often these days, people are really challenged by eco-anxiety. They don't really know, particularly when they're coming out of sort of a long period of education, you know, they're sort of teaching on a ledge, you know, where do I go, what do I do? Even if they're a landowner or a land manager, it's how do I manage that land? Or if there's somebody wanting to make a difference to society, how do they do that? So I suppose for me, it's about inspiring people. It's about learning, you know, what they're interested in, what do they get absorbed in? How can I help them to be signposted to be able to make the most of what they're interested in, and to signpost them to other projects and partners and initiatives that give them a sense of direction. And I do agree very fully that, you know, this needs to be something that is embedded in children from the day that they start nursery, that the countryside and the whole of society is something that we should all be involved with, and that particularly food equality, food access, food understanding, valuing nature, you know, the climate emergency, as I just said, and how we can play our part is really important for me. And what I love about teaching is when at the end of a year you have students coming to you saying, oh, I really know what I want to do now. I really want to be able to take a direction. And that's where education is really important. And I think a lot of people in our society, you know, just don't know how to help or don't know how to become good professionals. And it's giving them that confidence and that mentoring that we need to do to help people feel that they can play a part in society, whatever that part might be. So yeah, that's the bit that I really love. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion around this area later on. Thank you.
Yeah, Jenny, again, thank you very much. And I think that point about making a difference to society is a really good one, because I found it very rewarding to sort of drive around the countryside and say that I had a hand in something that's made a difference. And I think that's something perhaps we might explore a bit in the Q&As when we get there. So Ian, many thanks for joining us, and over to you.
Well, thanks, William. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Ian Hodge. I'm with the Department of Land Economy at the University of Cambridge. I've been there for, I guess, about 35 years and actually retired at the end of last year, but still grinding through the exam papers that William was talking about. So this is a sort of blessed relief at the moment. So I have an interest in land and environmental governance, in agricultural rural policy, I guess, and conceptually in property institutions and policy analysis and so on. So we teach a course that is perhaps broader, more conceptual, more academic maybe than the courses that many chartered surveyors embark on, but a proportion, not a high proportion, but some of our students certainly go into chartered surveying. What I thought I would do is to really pick on two thoughts that I had. And actually they're quite similar to the things that have already been said, I think. Thinking about land management and the role of professionals in land management generally, it seems to me one thing is that professionals need to know enough about other disciplines to be able to hold serious, challenging conversations with them. So you need to be able to speak other people's language. So there was a question about, do you need to know wheat from barley in the title? And the answer to that is yes. Do you need to be able to pick out different barley varieties from one from another? The answer is no. So you need to be able to understand the language to be able to empathize with the places that other disciplines are coming from. And so what are those other sorts of disciplines? And I guess I would perhaps emphasize some over others. So you need to be able to sort of speak the language of economics. You don't need to be an economist. You need to be able to have an understanding of some macroeconomics, so you can talk about the economy, interest rates, what's happening to the economy, what are the opportunities, how is the macroeconomy changing, how is it likely to change in the future. I'm not sure anybody knows that, but you can have conversations about that. Microeconomics about markets, market failure, government intervention. How does government operate? Why does government operate? What is the Treasury looking for if it's thinking about a policy? It's very much grounded in economics, sort of conventional mainstream economics, market failure, and that leads you into thinking about particular policies. Finance. And I guess a concern would be that rather than thinking about, and I'm not sure if I should say this with some eminent valuers here, but rather than thinking about valuation in a narrow sense, to think about land as an asset generally, and how does that compare with investments in stocks and shares or bonds or whatever? So to think about land as an asset class, to think about the methods, or to understand a bit about the methods that people analyzing those other asset classes understand, and to think about how that relates to land. But you also need to talk to lawyers, planners, other sorts of people. So you need to speak their language and know what it is they're talking about. You need to be able to challenge evidence. So you need to be able to think critically about the sorts of lines that other sorts of people are taking. I think you need an element of statistics so that you can look at the sorts of evidence that is coming from other sectors. And so when they say that things are statistically significantly different, you don't have to do the test, but you need to know what it is they're getting at when they're making those sorts of assertions. You need to know a little bit, I think, about cost-benefit analysis. How do we measure costs? How do we measure benefits? Not in detail, but what does it mean when somebody says that something has a benefit cost ratio of 3, and that sort of thing, to be able to speak their language. So that the first question then is to be able to know enough about other disciplines to be able to challenge. The second is to think and understand about how we think, about how will the world be different in the future. So what are the main drivers? So what are the fundamental drivers that are going to make the world different in the future? And it seems to me that picks up the point Jenny made about climate change. What are the implications of climate change? What do we need and we're going to have to do to try and mitigate the effects of climate change? How do we adapt to climate change? What are the challenges that that poses for a whole bunch of things? Globalization, maybe it's easing, but it's certainly changing at the moment. What are the major forces? I guess relationships in international trade, relationships between the US and China. How does that implicate us? What are the implications for us? What are the implications of trade deals? If we do or don't have a trade deal with the USA, if we do or don't have a trade deals with Australasia, if we do trade more with China or less with China, how do these sorts of things impact on the ground? Because these are all important for individual land managers. These are the things that will drive their lives. And how does that feed through into land use? So what are the demands on land? So food, for carbon, for biodiversity. The last election, everybody wants to plant trees. Well, what are the implications of planting trees? Where do you plant them? What sort of trees do you plant them? What do you do with them once you've planted them? All those sorts of questions are things that we should be able to discuss, even if we're not specialists in saying this is the right species to go in this particular place. What are the novel markets and novel policy innovations that are on the horizon? And some of them we touched on already: payment for ecosystem services. How do we work in partnership with different groups to get the scale of land management? Some large estates can see that scale without working with others, but for the great majority, that's about co-working, about working in partnerships. What are the policy innovations that are sort of on the horizon of offsetting, covenants, collective action? What does it mean to think about natural capital? Where does that take us? And perhaps the final point I'd make is to think about a world in which there is greater risk, greater uncertainty and ignorance, that actually we don't know what is going to happen. How do we plan for not knowing? And that takes us into issues about resilience. How do we build resilient systems that will be robust against threats from and shocks from outside and so on? They may be financial shocks, they may be climate shocks, all those sorts of things. How do we build systems, land management systems, that are robust in that sort of context? And that's, I think, where I'll stop.
Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Really thought-provoking. So really good. So Richard, you've got the anchor slot here to fill us in from your viewpoint. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you, William, and thank you to the rest of the panel. I'm very different, very different from all of you guys. I was at the Royal Agricultural College, class of 87, and then I left. I went to work in the city. I worked for Willis Faber and then for Marsh McLennan in marine insurance, energy insurance, reinsurance. I then left that to go back to some family businesses, which I ran in the marine industry, and also some farming, which I've been doing all the time, and some estate work. And then I had some restructuring of our industrial businesses, which we sold into private equity. So I had some exposure to private equity there on the sales side and what their requirements are. And then since then, over the last 3 years, I've come back to working in our property and farming business, and I have been looking at how that functions and trying to use my experience gained through the city and thereafter to restructure ourselves into a much more business-like and vibrant company. And I suppose that hopefully people are listening, we may be your future employers. We changed the way we do our business here, and David will be delighted to know that I have a CAAV CEO now, so hence William's comments on CEOs and Ian's about how businesses structure themselves. We have a COOO, Chief Operating Officer, who is a qualified accountant. We actually have another qualified accountant who works with us. And we are trying to work within professional advisors. So we use Savills, Struts and Knight Frank, and a small local firm called Weldon Beasley, who are extremely good for doing our specialist work. And then a lot of that is what you've been alluding to, which is this value added layer that we're looking for. So we're looking for people who can bring both deals to us and who can help us with our more complex layers, and it's this area of specialism that we've looked at and which we wish to buy in. We are growing and we hope to grow, and I hope that if there are any questions from anyone that's listening in about what they see their future as, and I can help with saying what we're looking for, then that can feed backwards into what people should be looking for their education for. I must say that although it was a rather odd step to go from the Royal Agricultural College, as it was, and the Rural Estate Management that I did for 3 years into insurance, it served me extremely well. The cross-section of legal, accounting, valuations actually are disciplines that serve you very, very well in the broader business. And I really hope that the challenges which are going to be thrown on 95% of landowners and their participants, from farmers to camping to glamping, will be served by those courses which you are all coming through, and which will make a significant difference. So if I can help on the end part of it, then I'll be only too happy to add my 5 pence worth.
Great. Well, Richard, thank you very much for that, because that put a really interesting perspective on the land management, the role of the estate owner, the business person, versus us who are in academic areas, or the likes of David, who's president of the CAAV. Please, can I just encourage everybody out there, or everybody who's kindly listening in, to do ask questions. Keep them coming, because you've got this opportunity with a fantastic panel to pick their brains. So do keep them coming, and I'll try and keep control of them. But so there we go. So the first question we've got is: do rural surveyors have the necessary skills to manage a modern rural or urban estate stroke farm? Can I perhaps direct that at you, Richard, first, sorry to pick on you first, but is your perception, coming back to the home farm and property business, that rural surveyors do have the skills to manage a modern business?
The answer to that is yes. I mean, we had a progression leading to where we were, and as a family, we worked in industry, with our land holdings being a sort of subsidiary of that. And now the industry's gone, and they're a major part of it. And I certainly feel that professionalism is an absolute must, and for most, it is brought in on a case-by-case basis, but we really rely on professionals. You know, for example, we have a very close relationship with Savills on our farming side, where they manage our contract farming arrangement, and it works very well on both levels. We are looking at alternative power and land uses for power, and Knight Frank are helping us with that. You know, so I think from where we stand going forwards, the more, the better disciplined you can become, the more attractive you will be for companies going forwards. And as an insurance broker, that was the same. Insurance is basically outsourced by all major companies and given to their broker to be managed, and they manage that placement within the insurance markets. And we see that coming through, and it takes away a layer of cost that we need to shift, because we can't possibly afford to employ someone full-time on that basis for those specialisms, but we do require their intellectual capabilities and their intellectual know-how.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's again a lovely insight. David, might you have something you would like to add from your standpoint as a practitioner and president of the CAAV?
Yes, thank you, William. Yes, an interesting question, and the answer to that is, well, they jolly well should have the skill, because if they haven't, they won't succeed. And as Richard just said, you know, he's looking at it from a client perspective. You want someone working for you with that skill, with that acumen. Ian said earlier, absolutely rightly, you've got to know enough about other disciplines to give that rounded advice, because you may be advising on land occupation, but that may influence on taxation, which may be inheritance tax or capital gains tax. It's knowing a heck of a lot about a heck of a lot which will give you the edge above others and make sure that the client uses you and not someone else. Interesting point that you're using different firms for different jobs or roles on your enterprise, Richard. Makes me wonder why Savills didn't tell you they specialise in something else, or Knight Frank tell you they specialise in something else as well. It's just a question of how you sell yourself as a firm and business to the client. And some people sell certain aspects more than others and get work because of it. It's fascinating. But the question, absolutely right. Any rural surveyor, any person working in the rural sphere professionally has got to have that breadth of knowledge. Without it, you just won't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Again, very useful. Well, let's, if we can move on to another question, and unless panelists, the other panelists were dying to chip in with something on that subject, but I think there's a bit coming for you. The next question is, what advice would you give to those who want to move from people management to the strategic side of things? Which is an interesting question. And Nick, perhaps you might be able to help with that one.
I had a nasty feeling that might have been coming my way, given that we work together in practice, where a lot of my work was in strategic management. I'm not sure there's quite such a gap as you might imagine between the two roles, actually. It's interesting, I think, in a broader sense, how much we talk about change, but the aptitudes and the skill that you need to do the job that we do, which is a very broad job, actually remain the same. You need the ability to appraise, and that usually means the ability to engage with people and the ability to understand, and then ultimately the ability to communicate with them and to inform them as to what your opinion is. And the difference perhaps between the time I spent providing strategic advice to the Crown Estate and others and the time I spent doing people management in practice really was in that communication element as much as anything. The real challenge for strategic management is being able to communicate your intentions to the client or to the group that you're managing strategically. So if you're in people management at the moment and you want to shift across to what might be regarded as the more technical area of strategic management, then firstly you need to spend some time with Ian and pick up on all the things which he mentioned, which are absolutely fundamental. But secondly, you need to learn how to get your message across as effectively as possible. And one of the big problems that we had engaging in strategic management was when we worked with other consultants, the extent to which they anticipated that the client knew exactly what the consultant knew and also exactly what the consultant meant at every step of the way, and that's not the case.
Yeah, Nick, thank you. And I think the discussion so far has been on this question of communication, and David, you mentioned about knowledge, and I'll come back to you in a second. I think this question of knowledge and knowing more than your client is a key part of it, because you know, listening to what Richard said there, you know, he's gone back to the family business, if I can put it that way, Richard, and you know, with a hell of a lot of hard-nosed business experience, work experience, and you know, turning up at the door of your house, Richard, and sort of just trying to waffle your way through isn't going to cut it. You've got to arrive there and be absolutely confident that you're one step ahead of your clients. And so, David, you had your hand up on that. Did you want to quickly say something, or not?
Yes, please. Yes, I will. Interesting point. People management to strategic management. A lot of what we do as surveyors and valuers is actually people management. It's managing clients' expectations, but also every client is totally different. You can have exactly the same job with two different clients, and they are two totally different jobs because their expectation is totally different. Some focus financially, totally. Others focus on family issues, totally. Some do a blend of both. Some bring in other things into the mix. The current coronavirus problems have created a lot of interesting results with clients in terms of how they react to some of their smaller tenants in diversification schemes. Some have said, we still want the rent coming in. Others have said, well, yeah, but you can pay the rent late, but we still want it. Others have said, we'll give you a rent holiday. It's just how you approach it. And different clients, for different reasons, need treating and handling very differently. And it's important that you handle the right client in the right way, otherwise you get it wrong quite quickly. But people management is just as important as everything else in what we do as rural surveyors.
Yes, David. I mean, I was talking to an employer earlier this year, and when we were able to sort of see people face to face, and he had employed somebody and said that he was just brilliant with people, and that counted for so much. Well, look, we'll move on if we may. And Jenny and Ian, don't think you've got off the hook, because your time is coming shortly, and there are one or two questions here. So, the question that's been raised is: do you think CPD in continuing education should be a requirement of land managers to meet our challenges as local, national, and international societies? So, Jenny, perhaps I could start with you, and then Ian follow in behind.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually think it's essential that we all keep learning, and I think particularly for land managers who are very much involved in their businesses, sometimes that they can lose sight of the speed at which there is change happening. The one thing they are seeing is the change in the climate, and coming on to Jonty's question later on, which I'd love to comment on as well, about regenerative agriculture, particularly, that, you know, we feel regenerative agriculture and managing the environment is something that has to be shared, and the innovation around that and the brilliant case studies that are going forward about relocalisation is something that all farmers and land managers and land advisors should be kept up to speed with, because, you know, some people run very, very efficient businesses, like sounds like some of our panelists, you know, but you can't protect your business from it raining for 3 months, or not raining for 3 months, or your premises flooding, or, you know, so I think that the practices of how we manage our land and produce our food in a way that's much more embedding climate resilience, which is about capturing carbon in our soils, building organic matter, you know, about how we manage water across our landscapes, you know, have agroecological principles, is actually now fundamental to the success of the management of land. So it's essential, I think, that CPD training is actually you know, offered and could be an essential requirement of land managers going forward. And I do agree that, you know, it should be part of all fundamental education within every agricultural institution, that regenerative practices should be taught as a foundation about, obviously, the essential role of soil. So it's very much, yes, I would say for me that's a yes. Thank you.
Yeah, Ian, shall we? Thank you, Jenny. That's really helpful. Ian, straight on to you, please.
Well, I certainly can't disagree with continuous learning. So absolutely. I mean, the world is changing, and perhaps the speed of change is accelerating. So in order to cope with that, you need to be learning. Is what you learn in college, then I would say should be the facility to learn, not. So it's not what you learn at college that is important. What is important is getting the ability to continuously learn. So I guess that's why we, I think in land economy, we tend to concentrate on fundamentals, and our students sort of go to see chartered surveyors, and the chartered surveyors say they don't know anything because they don't know how to value a hotel in a particular context. What they do know is how to find out how to value a hotel in a particular context. So it's that a capacity to learn continuously seems to me what education should be driving at, without worrying too much about the technicalities of particular things at particular times, because that will change. But for land management more generally, I guess there's a question about where that advice comes from. And I perhaps have a concern with the internet and so on, that then access to information and advice must be broader and broader. Whether people know how to use that or not, I don't know. Perhaps there's a concern that, say, a lot of agronomy advice comes from people or from organizations who are keen to sell you something. And that's the basis on which they are prepared to spend time talking to you. But if the aim is to get you to use less chemical, it's not clear where you go for that information, or who, apart from FWAG, of course, sorry, who's going to give you that information. And it seems to me the system, I worry that the system is set up fundamentally linked to large corporations who are there to try and sell you more stuff. Whereas actually, in order to make things better in all sorts of ways, I think we need to use less stuff. So I shall be interested in any comments about regenerative farming, because that seems to me interesting, but a good example of, well, who is it that's going to be going around to a farm and saying, don't use so much chemical, don't use so much fertilizer, think about your rotation as a means of avoiding that sort of investment and cost. Who tells them that, unless we have a public system of providing information that is there in the public interest rather than in a commercial interest? I'm not sure that's quite what the question was asking, but it seemed a chance to say it anyway.
Well, thanks, Ian. No, I think you needless to say, made a very good point, that I think it's the CPD element of it is obviously key for us surveyors and members of the Association of Agricultural Valuers, the CAAV. You know, it's a must-do to maintain our qualification. Otherwise, we're history in that respect. So, but I take the point also, Ian, that about you know, other sectors doing the same, and how we sort of keep the farming and agricultural and forestry and every other sector current. And one of the challenges I think that's come out of the webinars, and Jenny, you've chaired one of them, is the fact that it's shown what a huge number of people are involved in land management as a whole. And trying to draw all those ideas together and get the links going and the dialogue and the communication going. We talk to the students all the time about the importance of communication, but it's very important that once you get into industry, that level of communication and networking is kept up. Well, well, thank you very much for that. Let's move on to this one about this question. Are holistic, regenerative and agroecological approaches built into the content and delivery of university agriculture / land management programs, or is it rather old school and traditional? Well, Jenny, shall we start with you there, please?
Yes, thank you. I think we would really love it to be, as I just said, a foundation of everything that is taught, because of the importance of it, particularly going forward with, you know, producing food supported by delivering public goods as well. And I think that, you know, our understanding now from the latest research is that, you know, regenerative farming practices can be productive and more profitable and actually deliver all these services that we all want. So I feel, and I know a lot of people within the sort of like the forums that I'm involved with, that involve Sustainable Food Trust and all sorts of fantastic organisations like Land Workers Alliance and Community Support Agriculture, you know, agri-ecological movements, that actually they do feel that this should now be a fundamental module, for a core module for everybody working in the land environment, and that is long overdue. I mean, the modules that I teach are elective modules, so there is an opportunity for students to learn them, but it's not at the core. And I think we would welcome some of these modules being much more embedded within the learning, because the role of soil, as we know, could create so many solutions to the management of soil, to things, the challenges we face, and so that's really important, I think, for us to really heighten that within our education.
Thanks, Jenny, very much. Nick, would you have something you'd like to add there?
Thank you, William. I can't do much other than agree, really. I think it's absolutely fundamental. I'm not sure the contrast is quite as fair as it's made in the question as it might be, because if you go back to the generation of valuers that taught David and I, they would have been absolutely expert on soil, and they would have picked up soils and known exactly what was going on there. And I'll exclude you and David from this, William, but as far as I'm concerned, my knowledge of soils is poor. compared with what it should be. So I think couching those sorts of skills within regenerative agriculture and within more holistic teaching must be fundamental going forward.
Ian, as from your, I thought you might have, yeah, your turn, Ian.
Thank you. I mean, this is not something that I'm a specialist at all. But I'm involved within an estate in Essex, and actually, and this almost gives me a sort of legitimacy in this context, I think. But I was advised to read a book called Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. I don't know how widely this is known, but it's an extraordinary story about an American farmer who does regenerative farming, but seems to take a polar opposite view about almost everything. And clearly he went through a rough patch, but came out at the end doing something that doesn't use chemicals, he doesn't plow, I don't know, he cultivates, he has a mixed system and so on, and this seems to work. But what the thing that struck me was that the argument seems to be that having plants on the ground feeds the soil, whereas my sense is that most farmers would say, well, when you have a fallow, you have to stop the plants growing because that allows the soil to regenerate. And it seems to me absolutely counterintuitive and sort of the opposite of what conventional soils or agricultural management would tend to say. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I don't know where that sort of issue gets resolved. And actually those sorts of ideas need to be seeded and started, I guess, in the initial education so that people, and again, this is a case of continuous learning because these are ideas that are evolving and changing. So again, the need and the interest, engagement and excitement of people to try and look for new ideas and new ways of doing things. And when they find that they don't work, to try again and to resolve them. And clearly what Gabe Brown was doing was reading absolutely everything he could come across. He did come across all sorts of challenges and problems, but he sort of had the techniques and the ability to address them and to move to another stage. In the end, it seems that he's got somewhere worthwhile and good. It's hard to tell, he has a book to sell, so I guess that's part of it too, and that's probably part about my sense that we need to be able to challenge the evidence, and just reading one book doesn't really solve that. But it seems to me that's the excitement about education, that it engages people in that learning process. And perhaps it's more about regenerating our knowledge, our social capital, our personal capital, and so on through life. So it touches on the previous question that actually things will change. We need to know how to respond to those changes and adapt to them and cope with them.
Thank you, Ian. And just to add to that, I think one of our responsibilities is to encourage our students to be inquisitive, to want to go and look up things, want to go and do the research, and not just because they've got to pass a dissertation or a piece of assessment, but to actually do it because they want to, they can benefit from it. And I think that's just so important, and it doesn't stop when you leave. It really just starts when you leave in terms of developing yourself. It starts when you leave. That's where I go back to what I said at the beginning about universities bridging the gap between school and the workplace. Now, I'm conscious of time because we've only got a few minutes left, but there is a really big question that's come through from a number of people, and I apologize to those who I won't get through all of the questions. But it's around this question of recruiting people from different backgrounds into our workplace, into the rural workplace. And again, I touched on it at the very beginning. So I'll just give you a quick flavour. How do you think our profession should go about attracting people from a wide range of backgrounds, which many people think is lacking, especially in terms of role models with professional practice? What is happening within the education sector to actively encourage school children from non-farming estate environments to explore this area? And then the questionnaire goes on to talk about the contacts that he's got with schools. There is minimal knowledge or encouragement within their schools, and often it is hard for interested parties to get involved in an industry. So, Richard, can I sort of bring you back in as sort of non-academic, but clearly an academic, and as to how you think, because an outsider's perspective into this would be really interesting.
Yeah, thank you, William, and everyone. It is interesting. I mean, I worked in insurance, and no one was born into insurance. You know, but that doesn't say that we aren't fishing from a pretty small gene pool when we're taking people who come up through our industry. I mean, certainly as employers, we show no bias to anyone or anything. We're looking for capabilities. We're particularly looking going forwards, I think, for engineering capabilities, I mean mine engineering, but mechanical capabilities, and we're looking a lot more for people who know about basic accounting and the ability to cost out. And I think Ian rightly dwelt on this, and I know David has spoken about it. But we need ideas to be fully costed out, and if we're guilty of anything, we're all guilty of being led by BPS for all of our work in the countryside, and it's something that I don't agree with, and I don't particularly agree with BPS either, which is quite controversial, but that's just me. And I think it doesn't help our industry, and it doesn't help our thought processes, and it doesn't help our ability to innovate and change. And I think as we open up, as the rural economy, and we've seen it a lot here, after this terrible disease, has meant that people want to be in the countryside more, they want to work much closer to home, and they want to have the ability to use unused farm buildings for their own smaller industries. And we also see farming change and land management change, and it may well change, and this isn't the forum for it, but as capital seeks to draw apart, it may well change that people farm and people own, and that they're two separate sources of capital running parallel to each other. And obviously they manage the landscape in a way that brings forward both farming as an industry and the countryside as something.
Richard, we've lost you there, Richard. If you can hear, we just lost you. So you might want...
I said you can't invite people into your industry, but you can make it accessible for them. And so I hope that education and you guys will be able to make it that people want to come down your way. We had to do it with insurance, and we got some really good, bright guys from all and every background coming in.
Brilliant. Well, Richard, that's really useful. David, I was hoping you'd put your hand up because I was coming to you next. And then I think we've got about 2 minutes and then we're done, but that hopefully will do it for you.
Thank you, William. I think it comes back to teaching the teachers. There are so many teachers out there who have got no idea what goes on in the countryside. They think if you work in the countryside, basically you shovel shit. Well, it's much more than that. Technology is far more advanced in the countryside than most other places, and it's getting that across. And it's not just in professional work, it's all aspects of countryside work, and it's teaching the teachers. So it's up to us as professionals, and also for farmers, landowners, to go into schools, inspire children to want to work in the countryside. And if you can do that, you get even 10%. You're getting a whole lot more than coming at the moment.
David, I'm completely with you there. Absolutely. Nick, you had your hand up, and then I'd like to try and get some takeaways, but I might have to do the takeaways after we've closed.
Just two very practical points, if I may, William. That's why I've come on in person, so to speak. In terms of getting people interested in the profession, there is a very good organisation called Pathways to Property, which works in property terms, getting people from backgrounds who wouldn't be used to property, at least to engage with the profession as a whole, and then some of those will be drawn into the rural sector. But the experience that we had working with schools a while ago for an estate is that teachers are very short of time. We all complain about being short of time, but teachers in secondary and primary schools are very short of time. If you're looking to help directly in engaging school children with our sectors, think about paying for a supply teacher for an afternoon to enable them to come out and actually see things on the ground. Just two practical issues, so to speak.
Great. Well, Nick, you've actually finished as the clock chimed 12:45. So I think we've got some first of all, can I just thank the panel for joining in with me this morning. I hope you felt it's worthwhile as panelists. I found it fascinating listening to you all and your different viewpoints. So thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who's joined in as participants today. I'm sorry I haven't got through all the questions, but I hope you feel that the way the debate has gone from quite academic through to the recruitment and trying to encourage new people into the industry has really given you a flavour as to where we as educationalists, landowners and professionals see it all coming. But I think the key messages for me is encouraging school children and teachers to understand, or for us to go and educate them and encourage them to come into our industry. And then as you leave university and go into work, to be business-like, professional, and understand your topic area superbly and be one step ahead of your client for David Brooks's sake, so that the fees can continue to be paid. And on that note, may I thank you all again. And
Thank
remember,
you.
it is all about getting your fees paid, isn't it, David? So, has anybody got anything else to add? Otherwise, thank you all very much indeed. And to the next time. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.